Our speaker tonight is not without her own strong views. Carly Fiorina was CEO of Hewlett Packard from 1999 to 2005 and was the first woman to run a Fortune 20 company. She oversaw the merger of Hewlett Packard with Compaq, which created the world's largest personal computer company ever. As CEO, she was a strong proponent of making American industry competitive on the international stage. In 2008, she became an advisor to John McCain on his presidential campaign, and in 2010, she ran unsuccessfully for a Senate seat in this great state against the incumbent Barbara Boxer. But she's not a quitter. She was born in Austin, Texas. And tonight, she'll talk about America's future as we head towards the 2016 elections. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Carly Fiorina.
Thank you so much, Terry, and good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be back at the LA World Affairs Council, and I need to update you on a couple things that have happened since I last spoke to you, I believe, in a luncheon address. One is that I have hair. For those of you who were at that speech, I was still undergoing cancer treatment at the time and was about bald. My health is great. I'm past the 5-year mark, so I am a survivor. Thank you so much. And the other is that my husband and I moved back to what was our home and the place where we met and married. We moved back home to Virginia 3 years ago. So no, I will not be running for Barbara Boxer's seat again, but I am not done with politics either. For those of you who know me, you know perhaps a little bit of my story, but I want to just start because whenever I get a gracious introduction, such as I just did, I feel in some ways as though I need to set the record straight. When I was a little girl, this won't take too long, don't worry, but when I was a little girl, my mother gave me a plaque. I was about 8, I guess. And the plaque said, "What you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God." I didn't feel very gifted as a child. And I was a middle child. My sister was more beautiful. My brother was more talented. But those words kind of rang in my ear. What were my gifts? What were my gifts? I went on to become a college student at Stanford University. I graduated, however, with a degree in medieval history and philosophy. So I was unemployable. I went, at the great urging of my father, to UCLA Law School. I hated it. I quit after a single semester. And so I went back to work doing full-time what I had done part-time to put myself through Stanford. I could type, I could file, and I could answer the phones. And I became a full-time secretary at a little 9-person firm. I didn't have a plan. I didn't think I was going to make a lifetime in business. I was just trying to make a living. And maybe 6 months into that job, 2 men who founded that little 9-person firm came up to my desk and said, "You know, we've been watching you, and we think that you could do more than type and file. Do you want to know what we do?" And that was my introduction to business. I ran away to Italy, taught English for a year. My parents were by now gravely concerned. And finally buckled down, got an MBA, and began work at AT&T when it was 1 million employees as an entry-level salesperson in Washington, D.C., which is where I met my husband. I've traveled all over the world. I've done business all over the world, and I've lived in many parts of the world. And it is still true in 2015 that this is the only nation on the face of the earth where a young woman can start as a secretary and become the chief executive of the largest technology company in the world. It is only possible in the United States of America. And it is only possible here because, in fact, our nation was founded on what was, at the time, a radical idea, and what is still to this day a visionary idea, that everyone has God-given gifts, that everyone has potential. That is, in fact, what our founders meant when they said that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was their way of saying everyone has the right to try and fulfill their potential. Our founding fathers were not perfect men, and that idea initially applied only to very few men. You had to own 25 acres of property. It certainly didn't apply to slaves. It didn't apply to women. But over time, the power of that idea, that everyone has potential, that everyone has the right to fulfill their potential, the power of that idea created a more perfect union. And of course, this became a country where everyone all around the world knew that it didn't matter where you came from or what your last name was or what you looked like. All that matters was you had God-given gifts, you had potential, and you could come here to find your potential, to fulfill your potential. And so we became the greatest nation on the face of the earth because more people have used their gifts in this country to build a better life, to build a life of dignity and purpose and meaning, to create something new. Today, I have the great privilege of chairing two major nonprofits. One is called Opportunity International. We are the largest microfinance organization in the world. We've lent $6 billion, $150 at a time. 93% of our clients are women. And I have seen people in desperate and destitute circumstances, when given a helping hand, when someone takes a chance on them, when they are given the tools and the training and the opportunity to fulfill their potential, they blossom. The other nonprofit is called Good 360. We take corporate inventory, excess or obsolete inventory, of which there is a lot. And instead of it ending up in a landfill, which a lot of it does, we distribute it to 45,000 charities in this country and around the world. I tell you that because I have seen people in this country and in countries around the world in desperate and destitute circumstances, and my own experience in business reinforces what I am about to say as well. Everyone has potential. Everyone has God-given gifts. The question is, will they have the opportunity, the training, the helping hand, the job, the environment to fulfill their potential and use their gifts? And when more people can use their God-given gifts, our communities, our country, our world is a better place. I want to talk to you tonight about leadership, because I think the highest calling of leadership is to unlock potential in others. And I want in particular to talk to you tonight about America's leadership in the world. Because when America does not lead, the world is a more tragic and dangerous place. I got involved in politics because politics impacts people's lives. And the decisions that politicians make, the policies that politicians put in place, either help people unlock their potential and use their God-given gifts, or get in the way. In order for America to lead in the world, in order for everyone here to have an opportunity to use their God-given gifts, we have to once again become a vibrant, growing, leading economy. I say once again because, yes, the economic news is better in many ways. The stock market's up, big companies are doing well, unemployment has fallen, and yet the sobering statistics are these. Poverty rates are higher than they have been in over 3 decades. The number of people who are trapped in a web of dependence is higher. Income inequality is worse. We are now, for the first time in U.S. history, destroying more businesses than we are creating. And that's because, in particular, entrepreneurs and small business owners and Main Street business owners, the corner taqueria, the lawn service company, the dry cleaner, the nail salon, people like that say that government has become hostile to them. And by the way, in this regard, California, sadly, is leading the nation. California's educational achievement is at the bottom of the pile. There are higher rates of poverty in California than anywhere else in the nation. There is higher income inequality in this state than anywhere else in the nation. If you're wealthy, you're doing all right. If you're very poor, the safety net is robust. But if you are the middle class or you are young families trying to raise kids, you are heading for the exits. And you know that for the first time in a long time, more people are leaving this state than are coming to this state. This state is, in my opinion, the classic illustration of the impact of policies and politicians on people's lives. And so in order to have a vibrant economy where everyone is lifted up, where everyone has a chance, we have to have an educational system that works. People have to have the tools and training to be able to perform in 21st century jobs. We have to revitalize American entrepreneurialism so that instead of destroying more businesses than we are creating, we make it easier for entrepreneurs and small business owners to grow and to thrive and to succeed. We have to become, once again, the innovation powerhouse of the world. Economic leadership has always been the foundation of global leadership. It has always been the foundation of military superiority. And so in addition to caring about our own national security, we should care about building an economy where everyone has a chance to fulfill their potential, where we leave no one behind, because it is in all our interests. Many of you know, I'm sure, that I consider myself a conservative. And to me, what defines conservatism is that I know that no one of us is any better than any other one of us. I know that everyone is capable of living a life of dignity and purpose and meaning. I know that everyone has potential. And I know that if given the opportunity to make their own decisions, to build their own lives, to dream their own dreams, people will achieve more than if someone decides that for them. So now we come to America's leadership in the world. Global leadership doesn't mean rushing off to war. But it does mean, I think, and it requires, I believe, a couple things. First of all, I think we've clearly seen that when America retreats from the world, when America is ambivalent about its role in the world, and we are ambivalent about our role in the world, and as a result, our friends do not know if they can count on us, and our enemies believe they can ignore us. And the world is a more dangerous place today as a result. Leadership requires moral clarity. It requires courage. It requires clear-eyed realism. It requires absolute, unquestioned military superiority and the wisdom to know when to use it and when not. I think it's worth, as we think about American leadership in the world, it's worth thinking about the confluence of events in the last week. The tragic attack in Paris is one such event. We need to have the moral clarity and the courage to call evil by its name. We need to be able to stand up and say Islamic extremism, while it is absolutely not a reflection of a great religion, but Islamic extremism is a danger to the world. The Paris attack is tragic, and we learned today, not surprisingly, that the perpetrators were trained in Yemen by AQAP. Is anyone surprised by this? But it is no less tragic than the slaughter of Christians by ISIS, or the kidnapping and torture and forced rape and marriage of young women and girls by Boko Haram in Nigeria, or the slaughter of so many other innocents in the name of a twisted ideology. And so we should not be reluctant to say what this is, an evil threat that faces us all. At the same time, earlier in this week, the Palestinians gained the ability to join the International Criminal Court so that they could accuse Israel of war crimes. I think sometimes moral clarity means having perspective. Israel is not a perfect nation, nor is our own. But Israel is a nation that values women and their participation, that is fundamentally democratic, and there is no moral equivalence between a nation that defends its citizens and terrorists who slaughter innocents. And while people have become outraged by Israel's defense of its nation and its citizens, at the same time, where there is serious conversation in international tribunals like the ICC and the United Nations about accusing Israel of war crimes, we have Syria slaughtering and torturing 300,000 of its own citizens. We have ISIS marching across the Middle East. We have Russia invading with impunity sovereign nations. Israel is not committing war crimes, but there are plenty of people who are. And we have to have the moral clarity and the courage to say that as well. Hillary Clinton asked famously at the hearings on Benghazi, Hillary Clinton asked famously, what difference does it make how the attack, why the attack in Benghazi happened? And I think in this, she missed the fundamental of American leadership in the world, because it makes all the difference. If an embassy is attacked purposefully by terrorists with the intent of killing our ambassador on the anniversary of 9/11, that is a fundamentally different act than a demonstration gone wrong. And it requires a fundamentally different response on the part of American leaders than a demonstration gone wrong. And when we do not respond to an attack on our sovereign soil, when we do not respond when truly war criminals are slaughtering innocents, when we do not have the clarity and the courage to call evil by its name, then we create a situation where our friends do not know whether they can count on us, and our enemies do not believe they need to fear us. And so we have North Korea in a more aggressive and threatening posture than they have been in years. We have Putin on the march. And we have all the other bad actors that I have been describing. And we have an attack in Paris. And finally, I want to talk about personal leadership. Because economic leadership that creates a nation where everyone has the opportunity to fulfill their potential, American leadership in the world, all of that rests on the foundation of personal leadership, of leaders who know what it is to lead. And so I want to talk a little bit about what leadership is and what it's not. When I was a young woman, I was telling the high school students before, when I was a young woman, I thought leadership was about title. I thought if you had a big title and a big office and a lot of perks and a big budget and people reporting to you, you were a leader. And then I came to realize that there were a lot of people in big offices who were not leading. Leadership is not management either. Management's very important. Management is the production of acceptable results within known constraints and conditions. But it's not leadership. Leaders change the order of things. Leaders see possibilities, and they work with others to seize those possibilities. And the highest calling of leadership is to unlock potential in others. Those two men who came to my desk all those many years ago and said, "We see something in you," that was an act of leadership. So leadership doesn't depend on how big your office or your title is. Leadership depends on what you do, what you choose. In particular, leaders have a vision for a better future. And they, as I say, unlock potential in others to achieve that future. Before I close here, because I know we want to have a little bit of Q&A, I've spent the last decade, I would say, politically active, as you heard, but traveling all across this country and talking to all kinds of people about all kinds of issues. And I would tell you what I sense in this nation is disquiet. Disquiet. It's not partisan, it's not political. People are disquieted. And I think they are disquieted because they fear we are losing something. And they fear as well that we are missing something. I think what they fear we are losing is the sense of limitless possibility that has always defined this nation. This has always been a nation where we believed anything that was worth doing we could do. It was a nation where we believed that anything was possible if we applied ourselves to it. And yet the majority of Americans today tragically see their futures as constrained. And for the first time in polling memory, the majority of Americans believe that their children's future will be more constrained than their own. A sense of limitless possibility is the essence of this nation, and we are losing that. And I think what people believe we are missing is leadership. I think it is time now, as citizens, to get involved. I know you are involved, or you would not be members of this society. But I would remind you that ours was intended to be a citizen government. It is what by, for, and of the people means. We cannot leave politics to the professional politicians and the bureaucrats. It is too important. Because what politicians do and the policies they put in place impact everyone in this country, in our communities, and as we see every day now, in the world. And so I think it is time for us, citizens, all over this nation, to declare without apology or equivocation that this is, in fact, the greatest nation the world has ever known, and that we are a force for good in the world. I think it is time for the moral clarity and the courage to say, we will call evil by its name. We will stand with those who support our principles and our values, and we will defend our vital interests wherever and whenever necessary. I think it's time for leaders who know that their highest calling is to unlock potential in others. I think it's time for this great nation to rise and meet our destiny. I think, once again, we must become a country where more things are more possible for more people than any other country on the face of the earth. And I believe we must lead the world. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a microphone here. If you would like to ask a question, please put up your hand and Alexander will get to you.
Thank you. And ever since the Supreme Court allowed corporations to make political contributions, I've looked at our country and nothing makes sense to me at all until I suddenly consider, what if foreign governments and organized crime create dummy corporations and make contributions to our political events so that we get the absolute destructive dysfunction, I mean, school systems that don't work, politicians that just rape us financially, and nothing that works. Do you see any evidence, have you seen in your political career any evidence of this sort of thing?
Well, let me start by saying that bureaucracies have certain characteristics. You might think this is a strange place to start. But I started out in a huge bureaucracy, AT&T, 1 million employees. I've done a lot of work in government bureaucracies. What are bureaucracies? They are rules-based, process-intensive, hierarchical organizations. They do not encourage risk-taking or innovation of any kind. And what we have in Washington today under Republicans and Democrats is a set of vast, unaccountable bureaucracies that get bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And they are crushing this nation. I mean, the data is very clear. So if you doubt what I just said, consider this. By the way, businesses don't do everything right, but guess what? Businesses have competition, government has none. Businesses have shareholders to whom they're accountable. Do we even know where our money is being spent in government? If you doubt what can happen in a bureaucracy, which is ultimately bureaucracies, all bureaucracies, if left to their own devices, turn inward. They forget who it is they're there to serve. If you doubt that, consider this. On your iPhone, on your cell phone, your Samsung, whatever you have, I can deliver, Opportunity International, I can deliver a loan to a desperate woman in Malawi over a cell phone. But if you're a veteran returning home from Afghanistan, you have to fill out months of paperwork. It then takes almost a year for a bureaucrat somewhere to review your paperwork, to make sure you've earned the benefits that you fought so hard for. And believe it or not, the Veterans Administration headquarters building in Washington, D.C. is undergoing structural repairs because the weight of the paperwork is damaging the foundations. That's true. It is an example of a bureaucracy that is totally out of control. That cannot be fixed with more money. It won't be changed by politics as usual. But unless we tackle fundamental reform of these inwardly focused, incompetent at best, and corrupt at worst bureaucracies, our economy will not grow at the level it can. Now, all the way back to political contributions. You know what my view is? Corporations may not be people, as Mitt Romney famously said, but they're sure made up of people, just like unions are made up of people. So let's have the same rules apply to everybody. If you don't want the people in corporations to be able to put money into the political process, then don't force union members to put money into the political process. The rules have got to be fair. They got to apply to everybody. And frankly speaking, I don't think it's money in politics that has corrupted politics. I think what we need in politics is fewer professional politicians who've done nothing else but run for office. And what we need as well are leaders who have the courage to take on the Leviathan that is Washington government, that is feasting off our nation today.
Thank you. She realizes. Hi, Carly.
Hi.
You mentioned before, and I was going to ask you this, if you were going to run for Barbara Boxer's seat, but you said no. So you did seem to indicate that you still had some politics left in you. So can you please elaborate on that for us?
Well, I am currently contemplating running for president. Thank you very much. I have not made that decision yet, but there are many people encouraging me to do so. And frankly, I think I bring a different perspective, a different set of experiences, a different voice, a different tone. And I think that may well be important this time around. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a question. What do you think of the current allocation of power nationwide in achieving this goal of expressing our freedom and, viewing the potential in every member of the American society?
What do I think of the allocation of power? So, power is concentrated today in big business, big government, and big labor. That's just a fact. I ran a big business, $90 billion business, operated in 156 countries. So while I may not have liked all the rules and the regulations I had to deal with, I could deal with them. Big businesses can hire lots of lawyers and accountants. Remember when you may not remember, but everyone in the room here remembers, when the financial crisis hit and all the banks had difficulty, and there were a lot of people who said the answer was more big government. And so we passed something called Dodd-Frank. And the consequence of Dodd-Frank has been, these are just facts, 10 banks too big to fail have become 5 banks too big to fail, with record bonuses all around. And meantime, the community banking system, which is vital to Main Street entrepreneurship, the community banking system, which is where small businesses, family-owned businesses get their credit, the community banking system is having a real difficult time making it. I said big business, big labor, as well as big government. When General Motors was bailed out, whatever you thought of the bailout, many union jobs were saved, but guess what jobs were lost? The jobs of suppliers, car dealerships, smaller businesses all across this nation. The truth is there were more jobs lost across this nation of smaller businesses, non-union jobs, than all the union jobs that were saved. And no one in Washington said a thing. So today, the power rests with big business, big government, and big labor. But this nation has always been built by the small entrepreneur, the family-owned business, the individual community from the ground up. It is the nature of our success. It is our secret sauce. And so when more small businesses are failing and fewer are starting than at any time in 40 years, that's a problem. When the middle class is stagnating and their wages aren't growing, that's a problem. We're not going to fix this by more big government, more big business, and more big labor. We're going to fix this by focusing on small business and individual entrepreneurs, by making big government smaller and more accountable, and by making sure that everyone understands that everyone has potential. Last thing I'll say on this. Mindset matters a lot. We talked about education briefly. In Chicago a couple years ago, the teachers' union struck. Here in LA, parents gained a great victory when parents won in court here in LA that they could have the option of firing school district leadership and having real choice and accountability for their children's education. The teachers' union in Chicago struck, and the president of the teachers' union said this. The issue was pay for performance. The head of the teachers' union said this: We cannot be held accountable for the performance of the children in our classroom because too many of them are poor and come from broken families. What did she mean by that? She meant that if you're poor and you come from a broken family, I guess you don't have the same kind of potential. That is crushing.
Among all the possible candidates for the Republican presidential nominees, including yourself, who do you think is the most possible candidate for the Republican nominee?
Well, that's up to the voters to say. That's up to the voters to decide. That's what voters do. That's what voters do. And I think it's going to be a very full field. And I think that's a good thing.
Hello.
Hi.
What are your thoughts on Obamacare and the effects? And I don't speak in front of crowds, so that's, you know what I'm talking about.
So the question is, what do I think of Obamacare? So let's just start with the problem. Of course we have a problem in this country. It's a problem when pre-existing conditions aren't covered. I'm a cancer survivor. I know that in really personal terms. It's a problem when pre-existing conditions aren't covered. It's a problem when people can't get access to quality, affordable health care. It's also true that we have never had a competitive health insurance marketplace in this country. Never. What we've had are 50 state-regulated oligopolies. And it's true that the insurance companies sat at the table writing Obamacare because they wanted to make sure that they got the best shot. The reality now is that Obamacare, the piece of legislation, is longer than a Harry Potter novel. It's accompanied by 30,000 pages of regulation. Do you suppose anyone knows what it means? I mean, how can you possibly? It's probably 70,000 pages of unbelievable complexity. And meantime, the fundamental problem in our healthcare system, that we don't have a competitive health insurance market, where literally any insurance company anywhere in the country could compete for your business, where we don't have a competitive prescription drug marketplace, and where we don't cover adequately people who truly need assistance and who have pre-existing conditions. We haven't solved one of those problems. So I don't think you tweak 70,000 pages. I think it has to be repealed, and I think we have to fix the healthcare system in this country. But you don't fix it by leaving a bunch of non-competitive oligopolies in place. You fix it by creating competition, transparency, and accountability, and taking care of the people who truly need taken care of.
Thank you so much for your thoughts. I wanted to get your opinion on the state of partisanship in D.C. right now and where you think that is going, if it's going in a positive direction and there's a heel in the divide, or if it's getting worse, and kind of what your thoughts are on the future of that.
Well, I don't know how many of you think it's getting better. Just a show of hands. I don't see it getting better yet. Look, I believe, I hope, I can't speak for the new Republican leadership, but what I hope is that they will soberly and systematically pass bills on a bipartisan basis. Soberly and systematically start passing bills and solving problems. I'm really disappointed when President Obama stands up and says, I'm going to veto Keystone XL pipeline no matter what. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. We know it creates jobs. It's actually better for the environment than our current practice of shipping crude by rail. The data's pretty clear. I just don't understand it. I think the only way to serve the people is to understand what deal making actually takes. Because what is bipartisanship? It's making deals, right? It's making deals to solve problems. So what does deal making, successful deal making take? I don't care whether it's in business and politics. It requires people to know their principles, to know what they have to have, and you don't have to have 100% of everything, but there's certain things you have to have, they're core. Republicans have them, Democrats have them. It requires you to be prepared to articulate those core principles, to walk away from the table if you can't get them, but it also requires the ability to, with an open mind, truly collaborate on everything else to find common ground. That's what it takes. And so I hope more people will engage in that kind of deal making. We'll see. I'm following the big guy with the mic because I see hands around the table. Sorry to call you the big guy with the mic, but.
Hi, I'm Nadia Wiggins from Notre Dame Academy. I was just wondering, Ms. Fiorini, would you say that a possible solution to the Affordable Care Act problem, would that be to allow insurance companies to sell their products across state lines? Or do you have another solution for reducing prices yet improving competition, as you said?
Well, that would certainly help, but I would say I would use a slightly different term than you just did, allow insurance companies to sell their products across state lines. I would say force insurance companies to actually compete. I mean, we have 50 regulated marketplaces today. So what does that do? It not only limits the choice that a customer has, but it protects the insurance companies from competition. So, look, I come from the technology industry. The technology industry is the most hyper-competitive industry in the world. It's the least regulated, it's the most competitive. And what's the result of that? The technology industry delivers year after year after year. More value, lower prices, greater customer satisfaction. Competition works, folks, and we don't have it in health insurance. We've never had it in health insurance. And government now has intervened to create less competition, not more. And when less competition happens, crony capitalism rears its ugly head and customers suffer.
Hi, my name is David Doyle. I have a question that kind of piggybacks this question, and it goes back to something you said earlier about the banking industry where we had 10 banks too big to fail and we ended up with 5 banks too big to fail. And it seems to me years ago we had a banking system that was chartered by states, and then that was deregulated in the Reagan years, I believe, and then banks were allowed to compete across state lines. So now we have mega banks, Chase, Wells Fargo, and wouldn't the same, and so we have less competition in banking. So following your logic, would we not, if we allowed insurance companies to do the same thing, end up with 3 insurance companies in the nation and have the same problems that we have?
It's a great question, but you left out one critically important fact in your chronology of events. What you left out is that politics intervened in banking. And they intervened when both Republicans and Democrats said, you know, home ownership is part of the American dream, and it's the role of government to encourage every American to own a home. And we're going to do that through these government-subsidized entities called Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And politicians on both sides of the aisle said, absolutely, let's get these things, let's give them more money, let's give them the lowest interest rates possible. And guess what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac did? Encouraged by politicians, they started making it as easy as possible for people to buy houses. And they created all these instruments. And then the banks bought up all these instruments and engaged in a level of risk-taking that was imprudent and unwise. And as long as real estate prices were going up and everybody was making money, it looked great. Chuck Prince, the former CEO of Citibank, famously said, as long as the music's playing, we're gonna dance. But then guess what happened? Oh, surprise, surprise, prices ultimately came down. And the whole thing came crashing to the ground. So what you left out is that government got in the middle of that and said, we know best. We know best. We know that everybody should buy a house, so let's intervene and make it as easy as possible. And all those regulators, there were 26 separate regulating entities of the financial system before the crash. They all failed to stop it. So sounds to me like the answer is to create another regulating entity. It doesn't make sense. So we didn't have a fully competitive marketplace, is the point.
Let's make this the last question. I think there's one here.
Hi. 3 years ago, we had one of the most tragic American events happen at Newtown, Connecticut. As the mother of 2 young kids, the most important concept for the next election will be gun control, especially considering that dozens more shootings have been occurring in schools, young innocent kids getting killed. If you were to run for president, how would you address this issue that just keeps getting worse, especially for the future of our kids?
Yeah. Here is the sad truth about that massacre. Every single one of the gun control pieces of legislation that have been proposed would have failed to stop that. We lost a younger daughter. At about the same time that I was battling cancer, we lost our younger daughter. She was an addict, which is a form of mental illness. I believe if you look at so many of these incidences, what you're going to find at the center is someone who suffers from mental illness. And what you're also going to find at the center, certainly that was true in Newton, what you're also going to find at the center of that tragedy is someone who could not be stopped because no one understood or no one took the steps necessary to make sure others understood that this person was a danger to themselves or to others. I think we deal completely inadequately with all kinds of mental illness in this country, including addiction. I think we have very well-intentioned privacy laws that now have made it very, very difficult for people to intervene and help people who are mentally ill or doctors who are treating the mentally ill to talk with others and warn them. That turned out to be the case in the Colorado disaster, where you had a psychiatrist treating this clearly mentally ill young man who felt constrained to go to authorities and say, we have a problem. This guy is a danger to others. And so I think one of the things that frustrates me about politics is we tend sometimes to use a tragedy to promote an agenda that already existed, but that may have nothing to do with solving the problem. I think we have to tackle head-on the problem of mental illness. I think we have to tackle head-on the problem of pervasive violence in our culture. You cannot tell me that mentally disturbed people, if they are looking at violence and participating in violence on video games or on television or in the movies day after day after day after day, that that doesn't have an impact on their mental state. Just as you can't tell me that people aren't radicalized by ISIS when they see all these things that reach out to them on the internet. So just bear this in mind, whatever you think about gun control, and I happen to be a supporter of the Second Amendment, whatever you think about gun control, the facts are these. Every single piece of legislation that has been proposed would have failed to prevent each of the disasters that has happened in the last 18 months. And those cities and those states with the tightest gun control laws in this nation are also the most violent. Chicago, Washington, D.C., tightest gun control laws in the nation, and the most violent. So when we get into these very important political topics, I think it's really important to actually look the facts in the face and think about the core reason for the problem, as opposed to having politicians take it over and run away with an agenda they would have been promoting no matter what the facts. And I think I heard that was the last question. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen.